Now, what have I got to do today? Oh, hello everyone. My name's Janet and it's great to be with you all today. Well, I've got lots of cleaning to do. As you can see, I'm busy dusting and getting ready. Do you like my globe? Do you like it? Look, it's all lit up with lovely little lights inside. I like to have this around me, because it reminds me of the world we live in. Planet Earth, that huge big sphere covered in countries and seas with mountains and rivers. It's wonderful, isn't it, Planet Earth? And all the wonderful countries in there, all the different people. Do you ever think about them? I do. And when I look at this globe of light, it reminds me of all the people, lots of them different to me, who believe in different things. Oh, I love learning about people who believe in different things to me. Do you? And I've been thinking a lot. That's why I've got all these things out here. You're probably wondering what this strange plate propped up in front of you is here. And look, I've got a candle lit here on my table. You see, that's because I've been thinking about a huge family of people, our friends who belong to a faith called Judaism. So we call them Jews, don't we? Or Jewish people. And, well, there are Jews, in our country, all over and all over the world. And I got thinking about them the other day when I was looking at my globe here, because soon they'll be getting ready in the month of March for a really special celebration. And it's called Pesach, or Passover, sometimes it's known as. It's a great celebration. Maybe you have celebrations, do you? Do you ever have special meals when you get special stuff out on the table? Do you ever light candles when you have a special celebration? I bet you do on your birthday, don't you? And I bet you then blow the candles out. Because that's a great day on your birthday, because you're really remembering you, aren't you? You as a special person, another year older. Well, for Jewish people all over the world, next March, on March the 27th, it will begin for 7 whole days, a festival called Pesach, or Passover. So they're getting ready, and a few weeks before it, well, everybody in their houses will be getting ready. They'll all be getting out their dusters and their cloths. They'll be opening their cupboards and taking out all their pots and pans and knives and forks and everything. And they'll be dusting and washing them and cleaning them, because you see, when it gets to the festival, it's going to be time to have everything fresh and clean to praise and remember God. Well, they also, out of their cupboards, take all their food stuff like their fat, butter, lard, oil, flour, sugar, and any cakes and biscuits they've got tucked away in the cupboard. And sometimes they might give those to people who need them more than them. Or they might just put them in a cupboard away from the kitchen until Passover, Pesach, is over. They empty the cupboards and clean everything out because they want to be ready to be fresh and new for God for when the festival starts. So that's why I was getting ready, you see, doing a bit of cleaning at the beginning here. And when it's time for the festival, they're going to get ready for a really special meal together. And they're going to have on the centre of their table a special plate like this one. Can you see it? It's called a Cedar Plate. You can probably see already on the Cedar Plate there are lots of little symbols, pictures that represent different types of food. You probably recognise some already, like a meat bone. Can you see a glass of wine? Can you see some lettuce or cabbage leaves? Maybe you can see an egg there. Well, more about that later, because the Cedar Plate is going to have a very special part to play in a really special celebration meal that they're going to have to celebrate the festival. But I wonder why they do it. I wonder why all these millions of Jewish people around the world are going to bother to have this Pesach or Passover festival time. Well, you see, it all goes back to the story of what they believe in, the root of their faith, which is all written down in their Jewish holy book, their scriptures that they call the Torah. You've probably heard of those. In the Jewish synagogue, their place of worship, they have a beautiful Torah, don't they? Like a big scroll which is kept in such a special place and covered up and unrolled very carefully for when they read out loud from it in the synagogue when they go to worship and pray to God. Well, in that book, in that big scroll full of their scriptures, the Torah, there is the full story about how much God loved his people. And back long, long ago at that time, they were known as the people of Israel, God's people. And they love at this time of year to read all the story about how God showed his people just how much he loved them, how he freed them from slavery. Now we, and Christians all over the world, can also read these special stories because they're all in the Bible, the Christian holy book, in the first part of the Bible called the Old Testament. We share all these stories with our Jewish friends. Well, they want to remember all the special things that God has done for their people. And so, a big part of this celebration meal that they're going to have is going to be reading out loud when they all sit round the table these stories. So what are those stories all about? Well, mainly they feature a special man who was chosen by God, they believe, to do his work for him and to show how much he loved his people of Israel, called Moses. Yeah, you might have heard of Moses already. So when they read the story out at the meal, they read right back to the beginning in a book called Exodus, right near the beginning of the Torah and right near the beginning of the Old Testament for Christian. And first they read out loud the story of how when Moses was born, he had to be hidden in a basket in the River Nile, and how an Egyptian princess found him, and how he then grew up as a child growing up in the Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh being the king of Egypt. He grew up in Egypt. So they read all that. And then they read about how he went out to work as a shepherd out in the hills, how he got married, and then they read about a really special thing that happened to Moses. You've probably heard about this as well. When a bush set on fire one day when he was out in the desert minding his sheep. And this burning bush was all burning, all the flames, and then God spoke to him. God had done this to sort of make Moses notice him. And he said, Moses, Moses, I'm calling you because I've got a job for you to do. I want you to go and I want you to look after my people of Israel, and I want you to free them from slavery. You see, it was a sad time back then. So they read about how the Jewish people at that time were all slaves, kept like prisoners in Egypt, and they weren't allowed to leave the country because the Pharaoh said he wanted them as his slaves. God said to Moses, you've got to go and free them. I want you to get them to follow you. I want you to go to the Pharaoh first, though, and you've got to tell him to free my people, to let them go free, because I want them to come back and learn how to love me and live their lives in the promised land, in Israel. Well, Moses wasn't sure he could do that. They read that story out loud, and then they read about how God said to Moses, look, I will give you some really special energy and power. Lift your stick up off the ground, Moses. And when he picked it up, it says in the story, it turned into a snake. God said, if you think that's amazing, Moses, I'll do lots of other special things, and I'll keep doing them. I'll keep giving you this power until the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, says yes and will let my people free. Well, Moses knew now that he just had to do this for God. So they read all that, and then they read out loud how Moses goes to Pharaoh. And he asks him several times, please, Pharaoh, let God's people, my people, free. Please let them go free from slavery. You see, it was very hard, and they read all this in the story out loud as well. It was so hard for the Israelites, as they were called, the people of God, because they were being made to build the pyramids. Have you heard of those amazing structures? Yeah, the pyramids in Egypt. They were being used as slaves to build those. So they were having to make all the cement and mortar and cut up the huge blocks of stone and drag the stone on ropes and pulleys and build the pyramids. And they were being very cruel to them, the Egyptians. The guards were whipping them and beating them every day to make them work harder and harder. It was a terrible life. No wonder God wanted his people to be free. Well, Moses knew all this. So they keep reading the story out loud at the meal, and they find out how Moses kept going and asking Pharaoh. But every time he asked him, Pharaoh said, "No, no, no, I won't set them free. They're my slaves." Well, all different things started to happen, and they read out loud in the story that God made all sorts of things happen. He sent 10 horrible things to happen in Egypt, called the plagues, the 10 plagues. Oh, there were awful things that happened. There were lots of hailstorms that battered people's buildings and heads. There were boils. They got boils on their skin, a plague of boils. There was even a plague of locusts, those insects that are very nasty, that fly around and bite you. There was a plague of frogs everywhere in the land. It was terrible. And each time there was a plague and the Egyptians were sad, Pharaoh still would not let the people go. Moses kept going to ask him, and he kept saying no, no, no. Well, the final plague came, and that was a really, really sad one, when all the little baby boys in Egypt died. And that was extremely sad. I'll tell you more about that later, and how the Jewish little baby boys were saved. But still the Pharaoh was saying no. But then he thought about it, and he thought, this is the most terrible thing to happen in my country. And this time when Moses went to him and said, "Please, Pharaoh, let all the Israelites go free," Pharaoh said, "All right, if you get them gone quickly, get them out of my country, leave now, then I will let them go free." So the next bit they read out at the meal around the table is this story of freedom, how Moses led all the people out of Egypt. He asked them to pack what they needed and some food, and the only thing they could bring them with them to eat was bread that hadn't yet risen, because they didn't have time to put the yeast in the bread and leave it to rise. So they brought their bread flat and hard like biscuits, and they packed that into their knapsacks to bring with them. And then they read out loud the great story of how Moses led them out of Egypt. And when they got to a big sea called the Red Sea that they had to cross to get over into the promised land of Israel, oh dear, what were they going to do? Moses lifted up his stick over the sea, and they read this out loud around the table, because suddenly it says that God did something amazing. He made the seawater part in the middle to create a pathway all through the seabed, so that Moses could lead God's people through the sea safely and over to the other side. Now they were free and they were safe. But the Egyptian Pharaoh changed his mind in the story. And you've probably heard about this before. He changed his mind and he sent his soldiers in their chariots. He said, "Go and get them back. I want my slaves back." And when they got to the Red Sea to chase after Moses and the Israelites, the story says that God sent the waves back over, and all the Egyptian soldiers drowned in the water. A sad end for them in the story. But you see, this is the great celebration. So Jewish people all over the world, most of all, want to get together at the festival of Pesach, Passover, and remember and celebrate how God freed their people all that time ago. So they're going to have, as part of their celebrations, a special meal together. As I said before, they light some candles, because that's always a sign, isn't it, of God's love and light when the candle burns. And they want to remember, as they gather together round the table, that God, the light, has been with them all through their history. I've got a picture here, look, of a Jewish family who are gathering together around the Pesach table. Can you see them all? You can probably already spot some glasses of wine and the Cedar Plate in the middle with some special foods that we're going to talk about in a moment on it. Can you see that the teenage boys, look, and the men are wearing these little hats on their head? And these little hats are called Kippers, little round hats that go just on the top of their heads. And they always wear those when they're reading from the Torah, or when they're praying to God and worshipping him. It's a sign that they love God very much and that they respect him. So they always wear those on their heads. So they gather together, the table will be set, all the pots that they're going to be used will have all been freshly washed and polished, ready for this special meal. The Cedar Plate will take pride of place on the table. There are some beautiful examples of cedar plates. Maybe you can find some pictures on the internet. Beautiful pottery ones decorated and metal ones. Mine's just a party paper one. I'm going to send you one of these in the post. On the table though, it's the things that they've got that are so important because they're all going to remind them of something in that story. You probably saw, I don't know, on the picture that they've all got little booklets in their hands, look, because everybody in the family is waiting and ready. Usually it's the men and the teenage boys in the family who will read out loud the story that we've just heard. So they've got their little booklets there to remind them so they can all follow the story as they sit round the table. And they've got on the table these special foods. So they're going to place on the Cedar Plate the special foods. So what have they got? Well, first of all, they've got 4, here's 1, 2, 3, 4 special cups of wine, usually red wine. Now those 4 cups remind them that in their scriptures they can read about 4 times when God showed his love and mercy and freed his people. And they will celebrate together and remember that when they sip the wine together. But have you noticed there's another cup here? Because they always have an extra cup of wine that nobody drinks. And they will put that to one side because that's there for a special person from their Torah scriptures called Elijah, a prophet who also taught the Jewish people long ago lots about God's love. And that's there in case Elijah comes back, because the Jewish people believe he will do one day. So that cup is always there for Elijah. They have to put on their Cedar Plate 3 pieces of special hard, you hear it, like a flat wafer really, and it's called matzah bread. They have 3 of them and they will go onto the Cedar Plate. Now the middle one will be broken at the meal. I guess that will remind them, won't it, of how their people were broken and sad when they were slaves in Egypt. And they're going to share this together to remember their people and remember how God saved them. So that's broken and put onto the plate. One of them will be hid. They'll hide it somewhere in the house or the room. The children will have to cover their eyes while it's being hidden, because at the end of the meal, the children will go on a hunt to find the hidden matzah bread. So that's a fun part to look forward to if you're a child round the table in a Jewish family. And there's always a prize, and probably some other little prizes for everybody who's taken part, but a prize for the person that finds the missing matzah bread. Onto the table as well, they'll have a little bowl which has in it some salt water. So they'll put some salt in and they pour some water onto it to make salt water. Now, I don't know whether you've ever tasted your tears if you cry or you get something in your eye and your eye runs, but they're very salty. So when they have this on the table, the salt water reminds them of the salty tears that were shed day and night because the Jewish people, the Israelites, were suffering so much, weren't they, when they were slaves building the pyramids in Egypt. And they always have a green vegetable leaf. I've got a lettuce leaf here, and that can be dipped in the salt water. And it reminds them of new life. It reminds them that God freed his people from their tears. And it also reminds them, as March arrives, when it's Pesach time, that it's springtime and that God again is sending new life to the world, isn't he? They believe he's sending them the new life with all the flowers and the plants that are growing through the winter earth. And then they will always have on the table some bitter herbs. Now you might have seen right on the top of the cedar plate there, it looks like a parsnip. Can you see here? That is horseradish herb. And when that's cooked and mashed up, it makes a very bitter paste. And they usually have that at the table. I've just got some bitter parsley and a bit of rosemary here. But that bitter herb, especially the horseradish, when they dip their bread, their matzah into it, or the green vegetables, that reminds them of the bitter suffering, the horrible suffering that their people went through again when they were building those pyramids and slaves in Egypt. There's also on the table the bone from a lamb bone. Now that reminds them again of new life. It also reminds them that their people were given a new start when they were freed by God. It reminds them how their people often used to offer lambs as a sacrifice in the temple a long time ago. It also reminds them that when all the little Egyptian baby boys died, remember in that last plague that God sent in the story, God said to Moses, tell the Jewish people, my people, to paint some lamb's blood over their doorposts at the top. When the angel of death passes over, their little baby boys won't be killed. That's a very sad part of the story. So they remember that. They remember how their ancestors painted the lamb's blood over their doorposts, and they did not suffer the loss of their little baby boys. And after that, remember, Moses was going to lead them to freedom, wasn't he, when the Pharaoh said they could be set free. Also on the table will be an egg. Now my egg's just a raw egg with a shell on. They will have hard boiled this and then roasted it in the oven, so the shell will have been taken off and it'll be roasted. That reminds them of giving gifts that their ancestors long ago often used to take a gift representing life to the temple when they went to pray to God. Again, I guess it also reminds us of new life of spring, doesn't it? When all the chicks are hatching from the shelves and the baby rabbits and all the new life. So that egg is a really special reminder that God gave his people new life when he set them free, and he's still giving new life now. There's something else on the table here, which is rather a delicious little mixture. And it's fruit. I've got raisins and chopped up fruits. I've got nuts in here, look, some nuts. And it's mixed together with red wine and honey and sugar, makes a sticky, sweet, rich mixture. It can be put on the matzah bread to eat, or it could be put on something else that they're eating at the mealtime. It's called charosé. And this reminds them, remember when the Israelites, the people of God, were being made to work so hard, making all that cement, the mortar, to stick the blocks together to build those pyramids in Egypt. Well, this reminds them of all of that cement and mortar that they had to make, and how tired they were, and how much their bodies hurt when they were beaten to be made to work harder. So it really reminds them again of the suffering that they went through when they were slaves in Egypt. And that's the food. All the foods that make up the cedar plate. And you can see them again here, look. The egg, the bitter herb, the bone from a lamb, the chorizo mixture with all the fruit and nuts, the green vegetable down here, and there's some more vegetables there as well. Well, I think that is a really interesting and lovely way, isn't it, for the Jewish people to really remember how much God has always loved them. And you know, as Easter time approaches, when it gets to Holy Week, Christians also remember this meal, because we never forget what happened to God's people. And when it comes to Maundy Thursday, Christians remember how Jesus gathered with his friends the night before he was arrested and died on the cross. The night before, he had the Pesach or Passover meal. He had the matzah, unleavened bread. Remember, they forgot to put the yeast in the bread, and so they have this to remind them of the flat, hard, unleavened bread, don't they? And he had some wine. He would have had all the other special foods on the Cedar Plate as well to share. And he would have read those stories out loud, I'm sure. They would have remembered exactly the same way. This was something that Jesus did always, right from being a little boy, because he was a Jewish person. But Jesus did something different, didn't he, that night? And at Easter time, on Maundy Thursday, Christians will remember how he got the bread, didn't he? And he broke it. And he said some very different words. Probably you'll be thinking about what he said and what he meant when it gets nearer to Easter time. And he asked them to share it together, and he shared the wine, but he made it very different. And Christians call this meal the Last Supper now, don't they? It's a way that they still remember Jesus when they have bread and wine together. I think it's wonderful, don't you? There are so many wonderful things that we share with our Jewish friends in our country and all over the world. So, lots of prayers will also be said by Jewish families when they gather together around the table for the Pesach meal. If you live in Israel, you get 7 days holiday for the length of the Passover festival. That would be good, wouldn't it? But for some, they just have that time of coming together as a family, and when they look at the candle burning on the table, they'll really remember that God's light is still shining with them now, even when times get difficult, just like his light shone out brightly when he showed his love to them by freeing their people all that time ago when they read the story of Moses. Perhaps we can all just think about all our Jewish friends, can't we, all over the world at the moment, and hope that they'll have a really happy Pesach festival. I hope you'll enjoy learning lots more about it and enjoy doing the activity sheets that I'm sending along for you. And I hope I'll meet you all again very soon. So I'm going to blow out the candle, 3rd time lucky, and I'll leave you just looking again at the special plate and the cups of wine as we remember just how special this festival is to our Jewish friends around the world. Bye.